Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack some really crucial shifts happening in our digital world.
That's right.
And today, we're diving into the world of data privacy regulations. It's getting, well, pretty complex out there.
It really is.
We're going to focus particularly on the real ramp up in enforcement we're seeing in Europe under GDPR, and also look at some pretty significant new rules taking shape over in China.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of. It can feel a bit overwhelming, I think, for anyone trying to stay on top of it all.
Absolutely. But our goal here is to kind of cut through that noise and give you the essential insights, what's actually going on, and maybe more importantly, why does it matter to you?
Exactly.
And speaking of navigating complexity and, making sure things are protected, this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup disaster recovery, AI storage, cloud solutions, the whole package, really.
Hmm.
So if you're looking for genuinely secure, ransomware-proof storage, and they offer air-gapped and immutable options, which are pretty critical these days, Stonefly is definitely worth checking out.
Isn't it?
You can just contact sales at stonefly.com to set up a demo. Okay, so let's jump in. Europe first. GDPR. It feels like regulators aren't just talking anymore, they're acting.
Oh, definitely. The momentum now is really striking. I mean, GDPR isn't new, but the level of enforcement, that's really accelerated.
Right.
By January 2025, we're looking at cumulative fines of around 5.88 billion. That's billion with a B.
Wow, that's quite a number.
It is, and it's not just, the big tech companies getting hit anymore, although these certainly are. We're seeing this spread across finance, healthcare, even the energy sector.
So it's broadening out.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like the whole regulatory landscape is maturing. The message is clear. If you handle EU personal data, you need to take this seriously, period.
Absolutely. And nothing drives that message home like a record-breaking fine, right? That 1.2 billion penalty against Meta, that must have sent ripples everywhere.
Huge shockwaves. That was the Irish DPC, the Data Protection Commission, back in May 2023.
And what was the core issue there? Because that number is just staggering.
It really boiled down to data transfers,
Mhm.
specifically transferring European users' data over to the United States without what the regulators deemed adequate protection.
Okay, so the classic transatlantic data flow problem.
Exactly. Now, Meta is appealing that, of course,
Hmm.
but the outcome of that appeal, it could really change how international data transfers work, fundamentally.
Big implications then.
Huge. It really highlights this tension, doesn't it, between how global these platforms are and how localized or regionalized data protection laws tend to be.
It really does. It sets a very high bar for compliance, especially when data is crossing borders. And as you mentioned, it wasn't just a one-off for Meta. They've had, well, quite a few run-ins.
Yeah, a whole series of pretty substantial fines.
Let's talk about the 405 million one. That was about teenagers' data on Instagram. What went wrong there?
That one really honed in on protecting vulnerable users, kids.
Yeah.
The regulators found several issues. Instagram was apparently displaying teenagers' contact info publicly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they weren't giving clear information to these younger users about how their data was being used. Plus, the technical safeguards just weren't up to scratch.
And they missed something else too, right?
They did. They failed to do a data protection impact assessment, a DPIA, which is, well, it's essential when you're processing data that has inherent risks, especially when it involves children.
Right. And then there was another big one, 390 million, linked to consent. It sounded like regulators felt Meta was kind of forcing users to agree to new terms.
That's basically it, yeah.
Yeah.
The argument was that access to Facebook and Instagram was made conditional on accepting these new terms of service.
And why is that a problem under GDPR?
Well, GDPR is really big on the idea of freely given consent. Users need a genuine choice. They can't be sort of coerced into agreeing. So if you tie access to the whole service to accepting terms that cover data processing that isn't strictly necessary for that service, well, that undermines the whole principle.
Gotcha. It has to be a real choice.
Exactly. Users need to feel they're in control, not being strong-armed.
Makes sense. And the hits kept coming.
Yeah.
265 million for a data leak. That affected 500 million users.
Yeah, 533 million users. Just massive. That fine really underscores how critical data security is. Article 25 of GDPR, it mandates data protection by design and default.
Meaning security from the start.
Right. You have to build it in, think about it from the beginning, and also minimize the data you collect in the first place. A breach that big suggests, well, significant failures in those basic areas.
And there was an even earlier one, $251 million for a 2018 breach. Seems like data security has been a recurring theme for them.
Absolutely. That earlier case pointed to a whole range of problems, not notifying users properly or quickly enough about the breach, inadequate system design, not sticking to data minimization,
Hmm.
only processing what's really necessary. It shows regulators are looking at the entire process, cradle to grave almost.
Right, the whole life cycle. And finally, for Meta, $91 million for storing passwords in plain text. That sounds basic.
It really does, doesn't
Yeah.
it? It just drives home that you cannot skip the fundamentals of security. Encrypting sensitive stuff like passwords, that should just be standard.
Absolutely.
So failing there plus messing up the breach notification,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a big red flag for any regulator.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Amazon, they also got hit with a massive fine, $746 million from Luxembourg. What was that about?
Yeah, another huge one. That stemmed from Amazon's advertising targeting system. The authorities there, the CNDP, basically said the system was running without getting the proper legally required consent from users.
Consent again. Seems to be a running theme.
It really is. And that case actually followed a complaint from about 10,000 people. So, real users feeling the impact.
10,000, wow. And TikTok, they've been under the microscope too. A $345 million fine from Ireland focused on kids' accounts.
That's right. The Irish DPC looked at TikTok's practices back in July to December 2020. They found several breaches related to children's data.
Like what specifically?
Things like platform settings that might have exposed kids, age verification processes that weren't strong enough, and just not being clear and fair in the information they gave kids about data processing.
And it wasn't just the money, right? They had to fix things too.
Exactly. The DPC ordered them to get their practices in line within a certain time frame. And then there was LinkedIn Ireland, $310 million.
Okay, what was the issue for LinkedIn?
That came from a complaint, too. It centered on how LinkedIn used member data for behavioral analysis and targeted advertising. Regulators found that processing went beyond what was lawful and transparent. Again, clarity and having a legitimate reason are key.
So even professional networks aren't immune. And Uber, $290 million from the Dutch.
Yeah, that one was about data transfers again. Improperly transferring European taxi drivers' personal data to the U.S.
Ah, after Privacy Shield fell apart.
Precisely. The complaints actually came from French drivers, but the Dutch DPA handled it because Uber's European base was there. It just highlights again how tricky and risky these international transfers can be.
Definitely seems like a major friction point. WhatsApp Ireland also got a big fine, $225 million. Transparency violations, was it?
Yep. That followed a really long investigation, like 3 years. It focused on WhatsApp not giving users clear enough information about how their data was used.
And wasn't there something about the European level stepping in?
There was, yeah. The European Data Protection Board, the EDPB, actually told the Irish DPC to reassess the fine, likely pushing it higher, which shows how seriously they take these transparency requirements across the EU.
Okay. And it's not just big data processing, even website cookies are getting scrutiny. Google got fined, what, 90 million and 60 million in France?
That's right, Google LLC and Google Ireland. The French authority, the CNIL, found that they made it harder for YouTube users in France to refuse cookies than to accept them.
Ah, the old dark patterns kind of thing.
Kind of, yeah. It links back to the Privacy Directive, which works alongside GDPR for online tracking. If it's a hassle to say no, then consent isn't really freely given, is it?
No, I guess not. So even UI design choices have legal weight. Okay, moving away from pure tech for a moment. An energy company, Enel Energia in Italy, got fined $79 million.
Yeah, that shows the reach.
Is
That
it-
fine was because they'd unlawfully acquired customer contracts using illicit customer lists, like lists they shouldn't have had.
Oh, right.
And on top of that, their security for protecting that customer data wasn't good enough. So it really shows GDPR applies way beyond just online platforms. Any company handling personal data.
Good point. And we saw more cookie fines, too. Facebook Ireland got hit by the CNIL for $60 million. Similar reasons to Google.
It's exactly the same issue, making it too difficult to refuse cookies compared to accepting them. Regulators are really hammering home the need for genuine user choice on tracking.
It seems like it. Going back slightly, Google France had an earlier $50 million fine from the CNIL, too. What was that one for?
That earlier one was also about transparency, specifically around ad personalization. Not enough clarity, inadequate information provided, and not getting valid consent for using data that way. So the ad ecosystem is definitely in the crosshairs.
And Criteo, they do online ads, retargeting. $40 million fine for them.
Yep. Another one focused on behavioral retargeting. The CNIL found Criteo wasn't getting proper consent for tracking, wasn't clear enough about how data was used, and didn't make it easy for users to exercise their rights, like opting out.
It's not just customer data either, is it? H&M got fined $35 million in Germany over employee data.
Yeah, that was a really concerning one. H&M had collected really sensitive stuff about employees' medical records, family issues.
Wow.
And then, because of a technical glitch, this data became accessible to loads of people inside the company who shouldn't have seen it. It really highlights how carefully you need to handle employee data and how robust security needs to be.
Absolutely. And another Amazon entity, their French logistics arm, 32 million. What was that about?
That was for an employee monitoring system using handheld scanners. The CNIL decided it was just too intrusive.
Too much monitoring?
Yeah, the amount of data collected, how long they kept it, the stats they generated from it, it was seen as disproportionate, excessive compared to what was needed for the job. It's about finding that balance between efficiency and privacy.
Okay. And Clearview AI, the facial recognition company, 30.5 million from the Dutch.
Right. That was for scraping facial images from the internet, photos, without any consent, to build this huge biometric database.
Yeah, I remember that controversy.
That fine was a big step in trying to regulate facial recognition tech and protect biometric data, which is super sensitive under GDPR.
Okay, so that brings us pretty much up to date except for the very latest big one. Another TikTok fine from Ireland announced just this month, May 2025. 530 million. And this one seems really focused on China data transfers.
Exactly. This is brand new. The Irish DPC concluded TikTok failed to make sure data protection was sort of equivalent when transferring EEA user data to China.
Equivalent protection. Okay.
And also, big transparency problems in their 2021 privacy policy. They apparently didn't explicitly name China as a place data might go, and didn't explain clearly enough about potential remote access from China.
And the fine is split, right? 45 million for transparency, but 485 million for the actual data transfers being unlawful.
That's it. And TikTok has 6 months to comply, or they could face having those transfers suspended entirely, which is, a huge deal.
It really shows how concerned regulators are getting about data flows to places without those equivalent data protection laws.
Absolutely pivotal moment. Now, TikTok disagrees strongly. They're appealing. They're pointing to their Project Clover initiative.
Wait, I've heard about that.
Yeah, which is this big project aimed at boosting data protection within Europe, bringing in independent oversight for security, that kind of thing. They also stress they've never actually given user data to Chinese authorities when asked.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because they argue they use things like standard contractual clauses, SCCs, which loads of companies use for transfers.
They do. And they're pushing the data localization angle, too, that new data center in Dublin, more planned in Ireland and Norway, plus the independent oversight from NCC Group. They also noted, fairly, that the DPC acknowledged their statement about never receiving those data requests from China.
But there was another twist, wasn't there? Something about inaccurate information.
Yes. That's a crucial bit. The DPC found that TikTok gave them inaccurate info during the investigation about whether EEA user data was stored on servers in China.
Oh.
TikTok apparently found this inaccuracy themselves back in February 2025, told the DPC, and said the data has been deleted since. But the DPC is now considering, further action specifically about that inaccurate reporting.
Wow. That just layers on the complexity, doesn't it? Accurate reporting and governance is just critical when you're dealing with this stuff on a global scale.
Absolutely critical.
Okay, so that's a deep dive into the GDPR enforcement landscape. Let's switch continents now and look at China. They've got their own set of evolving cybersecurity regulations, which are having a big impact too, right? Different framework, but similar weight for businesses there.
Definitely. China's approach is very much driven by data sovereignty and national security concerns. A really key part of their newer regulations is data localization.
Meaning data created in China has to stay in China.
Essentially, yeah. It has to be stored on servers located within the country, which you can imagine is a major logistical headache and cost for multinational companies.
Right, if your whole system relies on global data flows.
Exactly. It might mean building expensive local data centers or partnering up with Chinese companies.
Right.
Big investments either way.
And it's not just about where the data sits, is it? The compliance burden itself is increasing.
Considerably. Companies are facing regular mandatory cybersecurity audits now. They need to do risk assessments, submit detailed cyber plans to the authorities, Basically prove their data protection meets China's national security standards.
And the penalties for not complying.
Can be severe, big fines, even potentially being kicked out of the market.
So it could mean a massive overhaul for foreign companies. Systems, security protocols, training.
Potentially, yes. Especially for smaller or medium-sized businesses, the costs, financial and operational, could be really substantial.
And this connects back to some earlier laws too, doesn't it? Like the national security law?
It does. That 2015 law introduced this broad requirement for information systems to be secure and controllable. That's the key phrase.
Secure and controllable. Sounds potentially far-reaching.
It is. It also includes requirements for companies to cooperate with the government on security matters, which has raised concerns internationally about things like potential access to encryption keys, source code, maybe even backdoors.
And the 2017 cybersecurity law built on that.
It did. It gave the government even broader powers for security reviews and potentially accessing sensitive info, including encryption tech that's either made in China or used by Chinese companies. This is a real point of friction.
Yeah, I can see why. Especially the encryption aspect. If you're using encryption chips made by Chinese firms.
Well, there's the concern, however hard it is to prove or detect, about the potential for hidden backdoors, allowing unauthorized access, maybe for espionage, maybe cyber warfare.
That's a pretty chilling thought for any organization relying on that tech. It's not just about data theft then.
No, the risks could go beyond data exfiltration. Think malware injection, ransomware, even just disrupting operations. And because supply chains are so global, these worries aren't limited just to companies operating in China.
Right, the ripples spread outwards.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have GDPR enforcement ramping up, China tightening its cybersecurity and data localization rules. What about the bridge between the EU and the US? The data privacy framework, the DPF. That's supposed to make transfers legal, but it's had a shaky history.
Very shaky. I mean, we had Safe Harbor, that got struck down. The Privacy Shield, same fate.
Yeah.
Both invalidated by the European courts, the Schrems cases, mainly over concerns about U.S. government surveillance access to EU citizens' data.
So the DPF is attempt number 3.
Pretty much. It's designed to address those specific court concerns, but, well, it's already facing legal challenges itself for Max Schrems and NOIB again.
And there's talk it might not even survive 2025. Political factors involved too?
There's definitely uncertainty. You have political elements, potential shifts in U.S. administration policy, President Trump's past actions on these things, the influence of groups like DOGE layered on top of those ongoing legal challenges. So yeah, its future is far from guaranteed.
Which creates this constant state of flux for businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
Huge headaches. For European companies, another collapse means back to square one, basically. Regulatory uncertainty, needing to reassess everything, maybe pivot harder towards localization or server-side solutions.
And for U.S. companies.
Heightened legal risks, definitely. Potential fines if they get transfers wrong.
Yeah.
And maybe seeing European customers drift towards EU-based sovereign cloud providers just to avoid the hassle.
Plus, it could slow down innovation, right? Things like AI rely on massive data sets. Restricting flows must create friction.
Absolutely. Seamless data transfer is pretty fundamental for a lot of advanced digital services today. This uncertainty definitely throws sand in the gears.
So what's the advice then for businesses caught in the middle?
For European businesses, the advice is generally don't wait and see. Proactively map your data flows now. Seriously evaluate localization options. Look into server-side tagging, other privacy-enhancing techs, maybe hybrid cloud setups. Have a plan B, basically.
And for U.S. companies.
Anticipate that regulatory pressure isn't going away. Make sure you have solid legal fallbacks ready, like well-drafted standard contractual clauses in case the DPF does get invalidated again.
It really is a complex web. Regulations, massive fines, geopolitical tensions. It's clear data privacy is just constantly evolving. Staying up to date feels almost like a full-time job.
It really does. But all these developments, complex as they are, point to this bigger global trend, right?
Yeah.
Towards more data sovereignty, more protection for personal info, even if the methods differ wildly from place to place.
So wrapping this up then, key takeaways seem to be GDPR enforcement is serious, fines are huge, and it's across the board now, not just tech.
Right.
Data transfers, especially to the U.S. and now increasingly China under GDPR scrutiny, are a major focus point.
Definitely.
Then you've got China's own rules tightening significantly, pushing localization, creating big compliance hurdles for foreign firms. And that crucial EU-US data transfer bridge. Still, it's pretty shaky, creating ongoing uncertainty.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well. It's not just isolated incidents. It's a global pattern of shifting data governance.
And it really highlights that growing tension, doesn't it, between needing data to flow globally for business and tech and this rising demand for national control and individual privacy.
Absolutely, that's the core tension playing out.
Which really leaves you, the listener, with something to think about. How do you balance that? The need for global data flow versus these increasing demands for sovereignty and protection. How might these competing forces reshape your own operations or just the digital world we're all part of?
Big question.
Indeed. And remember, this deep dive into the complex world of data privacy regulations was brought to you by Stonefly. They are leaders in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you need secure, genuinely ransomware-proof storage, think air-gapped, think immutable, definitely reach out to them. Just email sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.